Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Clare. I'm the Associate Director for Public Policy at Memorial University's Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development. Delighted to be your host here this evening. Delighted to welcome all of you here at the Regina Mundi School in Renews. And happy to welcome those who are watching on the internet. So welcome, everybody. Our topic this evening is about town planning on the Irish Loop. And you'd think it'd be a pretty dry topic, but I think it raises a lot of emotions as well. For 400 years, and perhaps for longer, development on the southern shore occurred slowly and organically. Houses and fishing rooms would be built, then later on churches, schools, community halls, fish plants, and retail establishments. Every development was pretty much on the same human scale. But lately, a couple of new developments are occurring. First, as roads and cars are improved, it's now possible to commute daily for longer distances to go to work in St. John's, for example. So we're seeing communities down here becoming bedroom communities. So now we're seeing more housing developments and not simply individual houses happening. And secondly, with the development of the offshore oil and gas industry, large firms want to set up industrial developments on the southern shore, from harborside facilities to warehouses to manufacturing plants. All of these developments are putting increasing pressure on citizens, on infrastructure, and on the municipal councils that often lack the staff and the expertise to deal with developers, some of whom are perhaps from multinational corporations, lots of lawyers and other experts on their side. What does the Southern Shore need to do to regain control over the pace of developments? How can citizens maintain the appropriate balance between quality of life and the economic activity that's required to ensure a sustainable future? How can municipal councils be empowered to both encourage desirable activity and to discourage undesirable activity? So these are some of the questions, and you'll probably have tons of other questions as well that we're going to discuss here this evening. How do we control what's happening in our region? We're delighted to have three people who have dealt with this issue for many years, or thought about it, etc. I'll introduce Harold Mullowney at the extreme, at your extreme right, chairs the Southern Shore Joint Council and is deputy mayor of Babels. He has experience in the fishing industry and was an educator for over 30 years. He's the recipient of the Newfoundland Labrador Teachers Association Special Recognition Award for outstanding personal contribution and achievement in community service, and for social and cultural endeavours. In 2004, the provincial government awarded him the Community Economic Development Award for outstanding individual achievement. In 2009, he was the recipient of Memorial's Tribute Award for outstanding service. So obviously a person who's contributed a lot to the region and who many of you will know. Dr. Tom Cooper in the middle is an associate professor in the Faculty of Business Administration at Memorial University. His research interests include Aboriginal business, risk management, and strategic planning. He has published his research in a number of peer-reviewed journals and has spoken at international, national, and local conferences. Aside from a number of research awards, he was the recipient of Memorial University's President's Award for Outstanding Teaching in 2013. He is currently undertaking research that explores water quality in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, which I know is a big topic here as well. Neil Dott, my immediate left, is the owner and president of Tract Consulting Incorporated. He became a member of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, the CSLA, in 1995, and has been recognized for his contribution to his profession when he was inducted as a fellow of the CSLA in 2013. Mr. Daw has been the owner and president of Tract Consulting Incorporated since 1998, a company focused on providing professional planning and landscape architectural services to business and communities throughout this province. His company has won awards of excellence on the national and international stages. Each of the panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up with a discussion with you in the audience. So as I said earlier, if you're in the room with me, we will circulate a wireless microphone. So just raise your hand, we'll get the microphone over to you. And if you're watching on the internet, you will see an email address and a Twitter handle at the bottom of your screen where you can send in your question or your comment, and we'll read it out on the air for our panelists to address. So without further ado, so we'll go in the order, in the reverse order that they were introduced. I'll turn first to Neil Daw to kick things off.
Thank you, Mike. I don't know if I should sit at that little bench there or stand up. I guess I'm here now. I was giving a talk one time on planning, and I had a fellow stand up and say to me, he said, buddy, he said, the only fellow gets anything out of planning is the fellow doing the plan. He said, we don't need a plan. Why can't a fellow who owns land in our communities, let him decide he owns the land, let him decide what we're going to do with it? Which is a reasonable conversation at the beginning. But as you move into how we look after our communities and the development pressures that we're starting to see, we start to realize that there is a need to manage your land base. And indeed, what planning really is how you manage your land. I got a call about 2 years ago from a town clerk in a small community up on the Northern Peninsula, and she said, we got a problem. We're hoping you can help me. I said, well, what's the problem? She said, we just had a fella come in here, a developer, who wants to put 40 houses in our community, and we have no clue what to do about it. I said, well, what do you mean you have no clue? She said, well, we have no plan. We don't know how we can manage. We want the development, but we don't know how to go about putting the development in place in our community to take advantage of what it offers us. So as communities grow, the need to plan becomes even more pronounced. And as I've been driving back and forth this coast for many years, from Portugal south to my home in Kelligrews, and we're seeing the changes that are starting to happen. And I mean, this is a great time to be in Newfoundland. I mean, we're known as an exotic place. National Geographic says that we have the most attractive coastline in the world. We live in a lifestyle that gives us access to nature in a fairly uncluttered environment with most reasonable folks that we can call our neighbors. Yet development is coming. And if we look at what's starting to happen on this coast, it seems to me that people are starting to migrate up a little bit. And the population growth that we've seen in Bay Bulls, for example, over the last 10 years, it leads me to believe, at least, and others as well that looked at it, that people are starting to, they don't want to go into St. John's, but they want to get as close as they can to those services. So certainly a community like Bay Bulls is starting to see the impacts of how we manage a land base that oftentimes we don't have as much land as we think we do to develop, and things like providing road services and things like providing snow clearing and water, which is a big issue. And the other thing that we have here is, in this province along this coast, I think you have a brilliant asset, which is the East Coast Trail, that I think personally is worth a lot of money. Secondly, this is the place where we see tourism, and Bay Bulls, I mean, is a place where we're starting to see tourism and oil working hand in hand. So how do we plan to integrate maintaining assets to support tourism development, which the largest employer in the world, with the great opportunity that oil and gas is bringing to the community? And if what we're hearing is true, we're also going to see this development move up the shore. So how do you manage that? How do you take advantage of it? How do you get the tax return from a commercial land development if you don't have a tax base and a commercial rate in place that a plan allows you to do? But let me back up, and let's talk about how we should approach planning. A lot of the planning that we've done over the years, we found that some municipalities and some councils didn't want to engage the public because we wouldn't get anything done. Well, community is not about houses. Community is about people. So the approach that the new approach to planning that we're seeing and that we fully embrace is to engage the people in the plan. And when you plan, it's really important to engage the people in the community in a very meaningful way in making decisions about which direction the community is going to go in, and in establishing priorities for what you want to do. And engaging the community also empowers council in knowing that the decisions that you're going to make are those that the community supports. Now, will there be the odd bracket? Guaranteed. Debate is healthy. The group hug is great, but generally it doesn't reach at a good decision making. You need to debate and argue and decide within your community what is the direction that we want our community to go. We're big proponents of identifying a vision for the community, a vision that outlines what it is the community wants. Generally speaking, people in communities and businesses that set up in communities are looking for three basic things. They're looking for places that are attractive, places that have infrastructure that's added that's attractive, opportunities for the community to get together, such as we're seeing here, and a feeling that I'm part of that community, that I'm part of a social network. Communities that build those aspects into their plan have a higher local GDP, believe it or not, and there's lots of research that shows it. So really, we like to start with the community, and the next thing that we think should be done in the plan is identify those areas in the community that you wish to preserve for future generations. Now that might seem odd, because generally speaking, we say, well, 10% of the development, that becomes open space, and we just carry on from there. But the approach that we like to take, which is based on the principles of what we call sustainable planning and smart growth, is let's identify in the community those areas that we wish to preserve. Those might be areas along our coastline where there already is a legislated zone or buffer that you can't develop in. Areas around our ponds and waterways that we should preserve and use for pedestrian connectivity in our community. Our steep slopes, our important views, all those areas in the community that are special to the community. Let's protect those. Let's map them. Let's preserve them. Let's say this is where the community recreates. This is what will maintain our visual quality. And once we've done that, well, let's develop the heck out of the rest of it. We tend to develop sometimes a bit of a smorgasbord in our community that there's no connectivity. People are getting cut off from one place to the next. And we know from a development perspective, people that are in homes that are close to parks or trails or attractive areas have 3 to 5% more equity in their homes than people that are not. So it makes economic sense to do that. So we think it's important that when we look at a plan, we look at it from the perspective of governance. What is the model that we use to manage and plan our community, and how does the community get engaged, either by committee, by volunteer organizations that can support council? How do we maintain the visual quality in our community? How do we maintain that best and most attractive coastline in the world that National Geographic says we have? And there's lots of research that can confirm that maintaining those assets are not just good for attaching people to where they live, but it has measurable economic benefit. So parks and trails and maintaining attractiveness in your community have economic value. We need to look at our land and how we plan our land. One of the biggest challenges facing most every community in this province is nobody knows who owns the land. There's not a requirement to register your land in the province. I don't know why. And communities are starting to deal with that by mapping who owns what land where. But how can you manage if you don't know who owns the land you're managing? Infrastructure is very important, and we like to look at infrastructure in terms of scaling down your infrastructure. We don't need 11.5-meter streets. We can deal with 9.5-meter streets without reducing the potential for problems with snow load and snow clearing, etc. We need to look at culture and heritage in our community, because culture and heritage defines who we are and where we came from, and that relates to preserving those places and areas that are important to the community. And we also need to think about economic development. A well-planned community, when a developer walks in and says, I need 40,000 square feet of service land, you should be able to say, here's where it is, sir, here's what's going to cost you. Very few communities in the province are able to do that, and it has real economic value if you can. And also looking at developing clustering. They don't have to be big, but small clusters in your community where there's places to live, where there's places to recreate, where there's places to do business. And finally, and I'll end after this, thank goodness says you, is it's fine to have plans. And we support planning, but we must realize that a lot of communities in this province that we're saying should have plans have nobody to implement or manage the plan. So if you hire Tract and Tract does a plan for you and you have a staff of one person, how do they ensure compliance with what's in the plan, with the regulations that you have in place? It's no point in having a speed limit on the highway if you're not worried about getting a ticket. So we need to make sure that if we do have plans and regulations, that those plans and regulations that the community supports are what gets built and what gets put in your community. And you can only do that if you have support, someone whose job it is to make sure that, you know, the street's the right width, that the house is set at the right elevation, whatever those elements might be. Because I work all over Newfoundland, all over, many communities, and we're starting to see change that's for the positive in how we approach planning to our communities, but there's a lot of retrofitting that needs to be done. I'll end with this. We've been working on a model for community planning at Tract for about 3 years now, and I was giving a presentation on the model to a group of citizens who were really annoyed with their community. And they said to me, they said, Mr. Dow, we don't care about your planning fluff. We want you to fix the mess that's been made in our community because it's not safe for our kids on the streets. We don't have any trees left. We got no place to walk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So our job started to become not planning for the community, but retrofitting what's been done. So the opportunity is there, but in my opinion, as we grow, we need to manage growth, and we need to manage growth based on a vision that comes from the people, and you can't do that if you don't have a plan to make it happen. Thank you very much for your time.
Mike, do you just want me to answer the questions, or do you want me to give Neil took a different? Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back in Renews. My great-grandmother, sorry, was the last non-townie in my family born, and outside of St. John's, and she was born here 125 years ago. She was a Kenny. So it's always nice to come down here. I don't get down here enough. I do go a lot, kind of like Neil. I'm all over Newfoundland and Labrador, but I don't get to come down here. But yeah, so yeah, we could go say who I was related to, blah, 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 but that's from there. As part of this, so my role is at the Faculty of Business is I teach strategy, corporate social responsibility, risk management. I've done a bunch of projects with the municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, looking at municipal planning, mostly, and municipal infrastructure, mostly around from a risk-based perspective. Yeah. So sorry. No, it's all right. It's always good to hear myself echoed again. And that's a lot of times when you're lecturing to students, that's all you do. You just hear yourself. Yeah, there you go. No, it's all right. It's all right. No, it's all right. It's all right. It's once again, I'm coming out all over the place. I'm so excited to be here. The first question so there's a couple of things I guess we've been asked to address, and let me do it in answering from the question. So this is based on it. Unlike Neil's company, Tract, once again, is a real leader in this across Newfoundland, Labrador, and Atlantic Canada. I'm coming in from a slightly academic standpoint, so if you thought he was boring, wait until you see me. But three studies that we've done. We've looked at municipal plans in Newfoundland, Labrador. I spent 4 months of my life, which I'll never get back, reading all these municipal plans. We're at the provincial government. And so that's based on one. We reviewed 125. We've also looked at all the municipal infrastructure in Newfoundland and Labrador, mostly from an accounting perspective as well. And then thirdly, I spent a lot of time up in the coast of Labrador as part of the Muskrat Falls transmission line, helping towns like Forteau and Lanse-Claire, Lancelot prepare for that in terms of how they were going to get their infrastructure and how they were going to get their plans together from there. So the first question in terms of why is a town plan important and what does the absence of a town mean for communities and the residents is that, to echo Neil, it's a volatile time. Things are changing. There's a lot of private capital coming in. Private capital has to go somewhere. There's a lot better returns in terms of land and housing development, et cetera, than if you put it into the stock market, as we all have seen in the last couple of months. As a result, that private capital a lot of times is speculative capital. People will buy land or they'll take a hold of land and they may not want to touch it for a long time. I was speaking to a town manager on the Avalon Peninsula outside of St. John's maybe a month ago. And he was talking about dealing with big companies that want to come in and basically either get crown land or get local land and just hold on to it for years and years, just in the anticipation that there may be an opportunity along the way. So having that in place from a risk, having a plan in place can anticipate that things are going on. You're also seeing a lot more foreign investment in property as well, which is not a bad thing, but once again, overall is something that you have to consider in terms of how you want, what kind of a community that you want. And that goes back to Neil's point, in terms of any time you do a strategic plan and any time, whether it's a municipal plan or it's an organizational plan, etc. You have to start from the context. What are the issues that you're dealing with? If you're dealing with, if you're on the south coast of Newfoundland and Labrador, you're dealing with much more different issues than if you're on the Northern Peninsula. Or if you're here on this coast, how do you deal with, the great hub of St. John's metropolitan area versus that if you're down even not that much further down the road in Trepassey, etc. So how do you start to deal with what are the issues that you're dealing? And then as Neil mentioned before, you come up with your vision in terms of where you see the community. What do you want it to be? My wife is from the town with the best future in all of Canada, Asbestos, Quebec. I spend every summer in Asbestos, Quebec, which, because I have to go see my in-laws. But it's intriguing in Asbestos, which has the world's second biggest open pit asbestos mine. I take pictures every year. I kind of feel like Boyan, taking pictures every year, seeing how they transform themselves as a community, because nobody wants asbestos anymore. And and so they've had to make some strategic choices. They've tore down. They're huge. And they've gone from a town of being a city of being 16, 17,000 down to less than 5. But they've made strategic choices. They have really, really nice parks for kids, much better than we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. They have really good recreation facilities. They don't have municipal infrastructure. Their roads are awful. You think it's bad here, you should go there. But they've made some strategic choices. So that's a kind of vision about where you want to be. Then you have your mission, in terms of what you're actually delivering, and then you have your particular values. And this really comes to officials. As Neil mentioned, there's sometimes capacity issues in finding the right type of people to work within these municipalities, but it's also having politicians that have the courage and the wisdom and the strength of conviction to say, this is how we're going to do it, and not give in to outside external influences. And then once it's there, you have some particular strategic objectives in terms of saying, this is what we want to achieve, etc. And then, as Neil mentioned, you monitor and evaluate. Things change. What you want to be may be different in 5 years, maybe different in 10 years, definitely different in 15 years. You're constantly evaluating and say, where are we now? What are the key performance indicators? How are we going to succeed? So when you evaluate most of the municipal plans in Newfoundland and Labrador, as Neil kind of indicated, there's a gap. For the most part, the history of planning here in the province has been about land use planning. What are we going to do? And for the most part is what we would call compliance-led. The provincial government is saying that you need to do this to get money, we're going to do the plan. This kind of integrated plan whereby you're talking about where your vision, your sustainability, things like climate change, which is a huge issue for communities across this province, haven't really been addressed in municipal planning up to this point. Companies like Tract and the work that they did on the integrated community sustainability plans that came out through the gas tax are addressing it, but nonetheless, it's something from there. We could be, in terms of what are the main parts of a town plan, I've talked about the higher thing, kind of the higher level things, but talking about, community goals and objectives, talking about land use, what do you want to do with the land? How are the specific land use policies in terms of going to go on? How do you implement? What do you do with issues such as social housing, green space? Once again, just at a general level, it's all that sort of thing. It's intriguing though that Neil kind of commented in terms of Newfoundland and Labrador, sometimes, struggling in terms of planning, but planning is something that's kind of not as, it's starting to come in vogue again. People like Neil are becoming like rock stars, but slowly but surely, kind of like, it looks like an old Mick Jagger, not Keith Richards, but, but in terms of, planning was really, really, really popular back in the 1950s. It was very much in vogue. There was a book that came out of, I think it was called Town Planning by an author by the name of Thomas Sharp out of the UK. Penguin Books, you remember Penguin Books? They sold 400,000 copies of that book, Town Planning. That's crazy. When you think about, that's Stephen King-ish, in terms of people want to buy it. And then it kind of fell off because people didn't like these integrated town plans. If you've ever spent any time in Europe and you've gone to, especially the UK and some of the communities that were bombed out after World War II, really bad planning in some cases, like huge, horrible elements of modernization, etc. And so it kind of fell off, and there was this kind of approach to let everything go, as kind of Neil was saying, and now we're getting to the point where communities and people want that. They want to have integrated communities where they can walk, where they can have their children play, where they can have all that sort of thing. So that's what we're seeing more in the plans as well. So the resources in terms of required to complete a town plan is really, once again, is having that, that engagement, that going out and speaking to communities and community members and talking to your stakeholders, whether it be the businesses that are there, the businesses that may want to be there, talking about the youth and talking about what's important to them, as well as the senior citizens and the people in the community as well. So there's very much an importance of engaging, talking, and figuring out all those things in terms of what are the issues that you're dealing with, where do you want to go, and how do you want to get there. Because once again, these successful communities do require these far-sighted politicians, strong communities, active citizens, innovative developers, and much else. You're going to need, you're going to need elements of planners, administrators. Once again, it's not just about designing, but it's also about analysis, negotiation, communication, and consensual decision-making. It's doing things together to figure out where you want to be and how you want to do it. But I look forward to the discussion today, and there's lots of interesting things to talk about municipal planning and town planning. Who would have thought it? Thank you very much.
Good evening. I guess there's not a heck of a lot left for me to say, but I will say Babels has spent a good bit of time trying to put in place a town plan. And finally, this December, we have our town plan. I brought it along. This plan is plan number 3 for the town of Babels. The first plan came in effect, I guess, probably a year before or after, around that time we were first incorporated. But that plan was put in place way back in 85 and came into effect in 86. But that was largely, I think, a condition of government. We were becoming incorporated. And I don't believe, I was not on council at that time, I came shortly after, but I don't believe there was much consultation. And that's very important for you who are about to maybe embark on this. Consultation is very important. We didn't have a lot. One of the things that bothered me about that first plan, and still to this very day bothers me, is the fact that the boundaries of Babels were shrunken tremendously. Babels used to extend as far as some of you know to the Babels Big Pond, a great area. Now today we are running out of space in Babels. We are asking the government for an extension to our boundaries so we have room to develop and grow. But more importantly, back when I looked at that first town plan, I said to the people who were on council at the time, I said, where is our water? We all got wells and artesian wells, that's all we have. And they were content with that. But I said, where is our water? Our water for 50 years down the road. I mean, where do we get it? There's no water left in the hills. All the waterways have been given off to other areas when we shrunk our boundaries. So Babels is one of those areas, although we have a town plan going back a ways, the first one I think was very poor. The second one came shortly after that, and it came not at the behest of the residents of Babels. It came largely because we were getting corporate interests, industrial development was coming to the area. And they wanted a town plan. More than the community itself, they wanted a town plan. No big business wants to come into an area and spend millions of dollars and have the ground change beneath their feet. They need to have a sense of things are going to be this way for a while. You can always change it, but you must have that town plan. Of course, that drove us to get it. Now, the second town plan that we put in place was a private-public partnership. We, as a town, really didn't have the cash to put it in place. The businesses wanted it, so they decided to help us with it. And that's how it came to fruition. Now that one, although we corrected some of the problems in the first, we couldn't do anything with the boundaries. The boundaries were given to us by the provincial government. We were stuck with them. We're still not happy with that, still fighting over it. But we did correct a few things. We created, zones, residential and rural and commercial and business. And that was largely what the businesses wanted. But at the same time, we had residents who did not want to see their community change. They wanted it to remain a small little fishing village. We had a lot of competing interests in the town of Baybulls. Baybulls is a very big tourism town. Between the boat tours and the kayaks, I would think there are probably today somewhere between 70 and 80,000 tourists pass through Baybulls each summer. Some of them come for the seascapes and the birds and the kayaks and whatnot. Some of them come to walk the East Coast Trail, which is a tremendous asset along our coast. So those kind of things were important, but we had to create a situation where individuals could look at what their community was today and ask how we would like to see it develop in the future. Planning allows us to do some of that. Now, the last plan, which we finally got, this one, which was, as I said, adopted in December, this one has, again, many changes, but is it complete? I would say no. I mean, these plans are living documents. They change as conditions change, but at least it gives you a blueprint to go with. But comment made by our other panelists here, we don't have in Newfoundland the ability, once the plan is put in place, we don't have the ability to oversee it properly. Most of our towns have 1, 2 employees. We have councillors who are working full-time jobs in most cases and doing this on a volunteer basis. So as the rate of development picks up, we really don't have the wherewithal to oversee it properly, although we try, but things fall through the cracks. So that's the constant problem with it. The plan itself, I think, is very valuable. I look at areas that don't have plans. I sometimes hear people in those communities say, we can do whatever, because nobody breathing down our necks about rules and regulations. And I sometimes just shake my head and think, yeah, you can do it, but at some point your town will get big enough that you have to start managing what you got. And to go into an area that you've developed improperly and try and fix it will often cost 8, 10 times what it should have cost, because you've got to demolish what was done improperly and try and make it right. So right now we're into a situation where you have many communities along the southern shore of Newfoundland, the Irish Loop, and throughout the province who do not have any sort of town plan. But I would say to you, it's necessary if you want to grow and development in that area. It's very necessary, but it's also necessary because you might want to have some sort of vision for your community for the future. As Neil said, there are very important landmarks in some towns, and if we're not careful, they could be destroyed at the stroke of a pen. Someone will say, yeah, I've developed that, and it's gone forever. So some of these things have to be dealt with. And if I could just finish up by going back to the situation at Baybulls. Baybulls, I think, is very unique. I mean, when we started out, we were a little fishing community. We had a fish plant, used to employ 400 people pretty well year-round. Burned to the ground, 92 came along, July 11th, moratorium. We lost all that. So we had to reinvent ourselves, really. The town of Baybulls today is not really involved in fishing. We have a little bit of fishing, some crab operations, some American swordfish boats come from time to time. We have a harbor authority developed. We have tourism, big. We have a tremendous amount of kayaking and offshore boats going out to see the islands. That's a big piece of Baybulls. But in addition to that, we're a service area. We have an offshore supply base that a couple of years ago moved, I think, 1.5 billion, not million, $1.5 billion moved through that port. And a lot of it was just material that came to the wharf, transshipped to another location, and gone again. In addition to the supply area there, we have, of course, agriculture in Baybulls. We've got 2 large farms. We have a tremendous residential piece underway. We have many subdivisions started, many more in the planning stages. People are going crazy fighting over land, and that's going to happen anywhere where there's development. We have all of these competing interests, and somehow you've got to make it work. The town of Baybulls has been involved in sometimes town hall meetings that had many sectors represented. Could have been the oil companies, the fishermen who were looking at using the marine terminal, the guys with the kayaks, the guys with the tour boats. There's times the The boat operators tried to block the harbor, but they did finally come to, peaceful settlement, and things went ahead. Now, infrastructure was also mentioned, and as you start to grow, that becomes very important. The last piece of infrastructure, I will mention this before I finish up, is the Bay Bulls Regional Lifestyle Center, which was built largely because we saw a need, not so much for recreation, but for daycare. We had a tremendous number of new young families coming into the area, and many of them wanted a place where their children could be maintained while they were at work, so we needed a daycare center of some stature. The building we built was originally for recreation, but we extended a whole wing for daycare, private-public partnership again. That wing has 60 children in it. They lined up overnight before it was even built to get seats. We could probably put another 50 or 60 in the region into such a facility, but we don't have it. But the other thing you must be aware of, many of the families who came to that region, Bay Bulls, Witless Bay, they came looking for, as Neil has mentioned earlier, services. They said, okay, I'm going to come here to work in the area, but what do I do with my children? What do I do with my family? Where's the recreation? Where's all the rest of it? Bay Bulls is in that sweet spot. We're so close to the city, yet we have the rural existence. We have many amenities that towns much bigger than us do not have. I mean, right now in Bay Bulls, it's only 1,200 and change for people, but we have 4 doctors. We're looking for a dentist. We have a couple of pharmacies. We have a supermarket, and on it goes. We've all of these services that have come that people demand, and as you continue to grow, there will be more of them, but they can come pretty haphazard too. We need to have some sort of development plan, some sort of a scheme, so that we do it right, most cost effectively, and we save the expenses for our residents. And only by cooperating locally and regionally can we make all of this happen for the benefit of all, without destroying this tremendous, beautiful environment we have in this region. It is second to none. I mean, we have to preserve it, but yet we also have to manage the growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harold, Tom, and Neil. And now we'll turn it over to you guys. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, there's lots of issues here. Boyan is going to circulate the microphone around the room for you. This is your turn to challenge or to support the comments that have been made. Question down here, Boyan.
My question is regarding probably, this thing on?
Yep.
Probably smaller communities where they have no real infrastructure other than, say, roads and a municipal hall. They have no businesses. They don't see any prospect for industrial development. They may not have land that's suitable for industrial development. They don't have fishery resources, small craft harbor. They may have a small fishing base there. They may have small craft harbor, but it's small. They have no money to attract business because they have a town clerk that may be working 1 day a week. How can you convince them that they need a town plan?
Who wants to jump in first? Harold.
I think I would say, if you are happy with the way things are, you do nothing. You leave it that way. But if you have a vision for your town, you need to do some planning. I know the challenge will always be acquiring the cash to do it. But without starting, though, you will not see any change. And the change you will see will probably be negative. You probably can't do it on your own. This is why I'm a very big fan of regional collaboration. There are ways of doing this, but you're right. Many of these small towns just do not have the wherewithal, financially or human resource-wise, to do what needs to be done.
Tom?
Yeah, I'd agree. Does this work? Yes. Great. Moreover, a lot of times it comes down to either the political representatives, the volunteers, in terms of saying this is what we want to do. To go back to Harold's point, yeah, if you want the status quo, if you want to remain the same, then don't do anything.
But for the long-term sustainability of the community, there needs a lot of times needs to be the change. How do you convince them? One of the things I use, or from a theoretical standpoint, is just go through the scenarios. What is this place going to look like in 15 years if we don't do anything? What's it going to look like in 10 years if we don't do anything, or 5 years? There's tipping points along the way, and convincing people to say, yes, we got to make some decisions or alter. And there's shutting down is sometimes not a bad decision. Just leaving it as it is. But it is a decision, and I think by not doing anything, you're effectively making a decision that we're just going to let it happen. And a lot of times, that's going to pose too many risks for the communities, etc. So to me, it's just like, once again, you almost have to do it.
Neil, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I just add to what Tom said. There are communities that will never have a plan, and what's important for a community is we like to have a dialogue in identifying what are your risks. What are the risks of not having a plan, and usually they relate to services such as water supply. That's a big issue in the province, and we find as well that Tom talked about developing plans for community, all the plans that he's reviewed, and the plan, depending on the size of the community, can be different. We develop plans that are plans to manage growth. We've developed plans in near urban environments. Well, Bay Bulls would be one good example. We didn't do the plan in Bay Bulls, but a good example of that plan is about managing growth. We've developed plans for communities on the Northern Peninsula that are focused on simply trying to stabilize. Because those communities are depopulating, they're actually losing population. So the focus becomes trying to basically stabilize things. So I guess the point is that each plan has to be focused on the specific needs of the community. But a big challenge, to your point, is people need some resources after you do the plan to say, how do you manage it? And so the last 2 plans that we've done have been for larger municipalities, but we told them that if you're going to take this approach in this direction, you need to hire a planner, and that's what they did. In other instances, we've encouraged municipalities to think regionally and to actually share resources, so partner up and share a planner that works across a number of municipalities.
Did you have a follow-up, George?
Yes, I was playing the devil's advocate there, but in the meantime, there are opportunities that people aren't aware of and become suddenly aware of them, is what might be happening potentially in Fermuse. And to some extent what might be happening in Portugal Cove South with the potential for UNESCO World Heritage status. People may not have thought before. These things came suddenly, and they weren't prepared for them in the sense of having a town plan. But even another asset that's just, and you've mentioned it, 2 of you have, the East Coast Trail, which has just had an economic benefit analysis done based on a survey, and it generates $3.5 million worth of non-resident expenditures here in the province, adding $2.7 million to the gross domestic product. So it's a significant asset for the province. And for those communities who think they may not have any assets or a need to plan, if they can simply think of something as simple as the East Coast Trail, while they may not have anything else, they may have a trail through their community that they probably need to think about planning for, preserving it, to ensure that the East Coast Trail continues to be such a significant asset. So I guess my point I was really trying to make is that sometimes you can't see things coming, but when it does happen, and if you're unprepared for it, then you could find yourself in a situation where you wish you had a plan.
I guess in a way, a community plan is just a way of a community to speak to itself and try to understand what its common values are.
Yes.
Yes, I'm from the other part of Southern Shore, from the St. Mary's Bay side of the Irish Loop. Talking about town plans, just this morning before I left home, when I went out through my door and looked across the road from me, almost directly across the road from me, I noticed, and I have been noticing, that there's a patch of barren land developing and a chainsaw was going, and how would I put it? The physical appearance of the beautiful part where I live, to me, was diminishing. And that in itself worries me. And I think that, I'm only a new person really with council. I'm into my second year. But that makes me say to myself, how can we enforce something here that we won't have that happening? That will be designated areas for wood cutting. And I won't be seeing a chop here and a chop there. And the cosmetic part of it is one thing, but then the erosion and everything else that can follow with it is another problem. Like, I'm a firm believer in town plan. I mean, we live just an hour and 10 minutes from the city. And I'm not about to come to the conclusion that we're finished. I really think that there's opportunities for us, and I'm hoping it's going to come sooner rather than later. But I am concerned over the cost involved when you're talking about town plans. Like, I sit in a very small, we live in a very small community of 255 people, 147 of them are permanent residents and the rest are part-time. And we sit around the table looking at budgets, and I mean, one of our big issues, even though we have beautiful water, artesian well water in our community, is all the money that we seem to need to have to spend to get different things done with our infrastructure so that everybody can be guaranteed water. So if I go back and we do have a budget and I find out what does the town plan cost, and I have no idea, maybe you can answer that for me, but I don't know how much community support I'm going to get. Because even though I might convince some of them that we need a town plan, I'm also going to have a situation where somebody's going to say to me, Sheila, but we need to have that stability of water more. See, so it's sort of like hard to get a win-win situation here. In regards to the regional, I'm a big believer in going regionally. And I'm wondering, you're saying two things here. You're saying, yeah, we need a town plan, but it's not much happening in a town plan if you haven't got somebody to make sure it's implemented. And even if we manage to scrape up money to get a town plan and we can't come up with somebody to implement it, well, we kind of waste our money. But I know they're trying to introduce fluoridation now to our region. And they're talking now at government level of sharing somebody that will go to more than one community and sort of oversee the fluoridation system. So maybe that's an option. I just want to ask the question again. I'm assuming there's probably simple town plans and more complex town plans, and if the costs change, how much needs to be done. Would that be correct, or am I just being naive here?
And Sheila, maybe I'll ask a supplementary to your question. The provincial government used to have planners in municipal affairs at one point. Do they still have planners to help small communities?
They have planners that can help small communities in terms of answering questions and, you know, if they've got concerns. As a matter of fact, we have a program that we're doing through Municipalities Newfoundland Labrador called Strong Town Planning Partnership. And if you go on the website, we're offering free planning. We'll answer planning questions for free from municipalities, just because we see such a need out there. In terms of the cost often depends, well, it will depend on a lot of times just how big is your community. And the cost can range anywhere from, you know, $25,000 up to, you know, the regional plan for the city of St. John's, I'm sure is going to cost $350,000. But it depends on how you approach it. For smaller towns, you know, you might be looking at a really small town could be 15, 20,000. It depends on what you have, and what we're finding with some of the some of the towns that we've started with, when we went into a plan, we found that they don't have a plan now. So there's no boundary around the town that says this is the area you have to plan with. So you have to get that approved first. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to come up with trying to find a solution here where we can have sort of like combination system if it's possible. If, for example, if you came in and said, okay, we're going to help you with a town plan, and it's going to cost you X number of dollars. Is it possible for us to be able to do some of the work ourselves, to be able to get some of the information you would need to reduce the cost of that town plan?
That's always a possibility, yes. And sometimes what we do is we try to combine different elements. So every plan is different. Every one. It's different in the execution, and it's different in the process to go through, depending on the resources the town has. So if the town has people that can collect information, provide land ownership information, provide mapping, et cetera, that's what's really hard to set up and cost. Everyone is different, and it depends on the resources you have in your community that can support our work, and it depends on things like mapping. We've just done a plan for a town where I'll tell you we lost our shirt because we didn't check to see if they had any mapping, and the mapping didn't exist. So we end up spending hours and hours creating mapping for that community to do their plan on.
So can I ask you about the mapping now? Is that a big, complicated thing to do? Could it be sort of like some little bit of a training thing for somebody to be able to learn how to do some mapping and be able to do the mapping for your region or for your community?
You can do basic mapping, but remember that your plan is a document that has legislative authority and gives tremendous powers to a municipality. So the province has requirements for the plan in terms of the format it must be in. Like the province wants the plans either in what's called an AutoCAD format, which is basically a map on a computer, or in a geographic information system framework. So that has to be the format that your plan is in. So we're required to have the plan done that way, and most smaller municipalities don't have that mapping in place.
I'm going to ask Tom and Harold if they want to weigh in on someone's questions too. Sheila?
Yeah, mapping is certainly a big piece, and I don't know, as Sheila asked, can you do some stuff on your own? Yes, definitely, but some of it is technical, you can't. But there are pieces that you can do in your own community on your own to help save on cost. My real feeling on this is you really want to get serious about saving on cost, you got to go perhaps regionally on this and maybe look at a number of towns that are willing to do this together. I know years ago we tried to do a regional approach where most of the towns on the Southern Shore would have got it all done at one time. Government in its wisdom didn't see a need, but I thought it would have been fantastic because you could have hired a consultant to do the work, and by going after several towns at once, you could have probably gotten a darn good price. Doing them one off at a time, yeah, that's one way of doing it, but if you spread it over more than one town, you possibly also got more than the resources you realize you had to help doing little pieces on your own, because there is skill sets out there in various towns, and people can do pieces of this, as Neil said, but you may not have them all within the confines of your own geographic boundary, and that too is a problem, as Neil mentioned. Once you start, you might not even know where the boundaries of your town are. In the case of Babos, as I said, it was shrunk way back. Some towns have no idea where they start and where they end. And that's your first piece of business right there.
I agree, Sheila, with both what Harold and Neil said. The only thing I would say that I think makes Neil's life easier as a consultant, if you have those big conversations beforehand in terms of where you want to be, where you are, and where you want to get there. There is money available for those kind of conversations, because it can be one of those things you can do in a day or two, at least at a council level, and do some consultation. I'm thinking like even under the CATS program, social enterprise municipalities can access some money from there. But from a technical standpoint and all that, that's where the cost really comes in, because like as Neil said, it is a very elaborate comprehensive process to meet those regulatory requirements. But to me, if I was Neil, and if someone, a community came into me, or a group of communities saying, we've sat down, we've talked about what our vision is, where do we want to be, we've talked about what our missions and our goals are, then it's much easier for them, Neil to direct his technical staff to say, these are what we're trying to achieve, etc. So if there was any sort of cost savings, and I think, I'm going to quote Mike Clare here, but Mike always talks about how you get really busy, and because you're all volunteers, if you're councillors, you have limited staff, it's very difficult to work if you're working really in the organization, to work on the organization. So that ability to step back for a bit and say, where do we want to go? And I think that can save a lot of time and effort and cost as well, rather than passing it over and saying, Neil boy, sort it out. And then it gets a little bit more difficult.
Thank you, Tom, for quoting me and making me sound intelligent. I really appreciate that.
I quote you everywhere, Mike.
Sheila, from you right now is doing our best our plan. We're halfway through. Our cost is about $35,000. Okay, and regards to your boundary, Crown Lands probably have a copy of your boundary out there. And we get covered on our gas tax for ours. So do we.
What community is that, and what's the population?
From Hughes.
And population?
315, 317.
Okay, so not
similar
much
size.
different,
Yeah. So yeah, that's what we're doing right now with it. Another month or so, we should have it all pretty well done.
And the funding came from where?
Gas tax.
From the gas tax, okay.
Yeah.
Boyne had a question here.
My name's Orla Hegarty, and I'm a new resident at St. Vincent's. I've only been there a year and a bit. I was in Toronto for 45 years. So my first job was in the planning department in a small city in southwestern Ontario. And I'm just baffled by the fact that there's nobody with a planning degree sitting up there. Just an observation.
I'm an academic, but I don't have it.
But there is a field of academia called planning.
We don't have it at Memorial. That's one of the problems in terms of.
So I'd say this is part of the problem, that these things, you said that planning fell out of fashion. There are entire departments and faculties devoted to this. So that's just one observation. I have a lot I could say about this. Oh, I'm a mathematician, by the way. And so I'm not a planner. I was doing mathematical work in that planning department. Okay. But I have joined, I'm part of the board of directors of the St. Mary's Bay Community Land Trust Initiative. And one of our mandates is to develop in a sustainable fashion the area economically. One of the plans is agricultural operations. We are going into our third year of growing quinoa. And then another aspect, we're hoping to get the first community forest in the province. And there's community forests all over Canada, but not here. So, and that, again, economic, sustainable growth. There wasn't a lot of talk about talent attraction and retention, which is city speak for how do we get people here? So that's why I'm really a believer. This area has so much potential. And there are people on the mainland who don't know about the potential other than the tourism ads. So they come here, but they don't realize there's opportunities for small business development. So I know you're in the business faculty, and I know I've taught in a business faculty for years and years and years myself. So again, there's a whole area of work in this attraction of people. So my question is, what is being done about that with respect to small towns in the province? Another really disturbing thing I think is that from what I've heard here tonight, and from what I know in my lived experience as a Canadian, the fisheries industry collapse, and now I've seen it firsthand for a year now. The fisheries industry nearly executed all of the towns in this area, in my particular area. And now you're saying that we have to pay for planning when there was no planning done? That really seems backwards to me, especially when I come from a province that planning has been in place since that fad, I guess, of the 50s, if not before. And again, it's not something that fell out of fashion. It's just something that astonishingly has never happened here. But
you make some excellent points.
Sorry, yes.
No, it's
Yeah.
excellent. So I'd like to hear what the panelists, you've made several
No,
very
that's all
interesting
I wanted
points.
to say.
Yeah.
I will shut up.
I think in some regards, there's a resistance to planning in many areas. And even in my area, you know, this lower end of the Southern Shore, Bay Bulls, I mean, the first plans, I mean, people really didn't pay much attention. First one was done. Basically, something got to be done. Government expects it, do it, goes on the shelf. But I think you have to get more involved in that plan. You have to get people who are going to say, look, this is our town. We want to have some input into how it develops. We should at least make ourselves heard. But you're astonished by the fact that there are so few plans. But if you go around this island, I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, most towns have not planned. They've never planned. It's almost like, you know, the Wild West, right out there. People in many cases don't want any government. They want to be left alone. And unfortunately, as more and more people get into that area, some of them start asking for services and resources. My problem as a municipal leader has always been, at some point you're going to want resources. Why not do it right the first time so we don't have to spend 5, 10 times as much money to fix the mistakes you made? And I can see those mistakes still being made all over the area. I can see development going ahead, and I'm looking at it and I'm shaking my head and I'm saying, down the road, this is going to cost everybody in this region money because it's being done wrong. But I don't have an answer for that. That's the way it is in this province. We don't even have proper land registration. In the town of Bay Bulls, I mean, when a person comes in the early days, not so much now, we've been around a little bit, but in the early days when someone came in and wanted to build a house, it was like, wow, we now find out 3 new pieces of land, the house and those around them. We didn't know who owned it before, and nobody's coming in to say, hey, I own this land, I'm going to pay you taxes. That is an issue. And services cost something. And as long as people say, I don't need the services, and are not willing to pay for them, they won't happen. I can also sort of commiserate with people who come into the town and say, we're right close to St. John's. How come we don't have, sidewalks all through the town? Well, we got 40 kilometers of road in Bay Bulls. That's a lot of sidewalk for a community of 1,280 people. And I've often looked right back at them and said, listen, you can have anything you want as long as you pay for it. Because as a council, the only money we have is what you hand us in over the counter. We only have your money to spend on the things you want. So be careful what you ask for, and ask for the things you really want, and hopefully we can live sustainably. So that's part of the problem. We don't have anybody who's ever seriously looked at the need for a higher level of government. It's like, you know, when the first Irishman came here and jumped off the boat and said, what government you got here? Why? Well, I'm against it. You know, it doesn't matter who it is, I'm against it. And we've still got that attitude out there. It don't matter who's in charge, we're against it. So it creates problems, and it's a whole learning curve we've got to get around.
Okay.
I do have a degree in planning as well as landscape architecture. Your point about talent attraction is a really good one. In many ways, in my opinion, you're seeing it because you've been in Toronto for so many years. We don't see, because we're in this all the time, we kind of don't see it. Planning has never been in our culture. People, we get a lot about, geez, well, I can't afford that. I can't afford $30,000 for a plan. Yet, if you plan properly, you might have 40 kilometers of road and 1,200 people. The quality of place will support talent attraction. The ability to integrate nature and culture with place and to create beautiful environments is a magnet for people. We talked about the East Coast Trail, and some gentlemen that are heavily involved here this evening, is an incredible asset that is world renowned. Yet the our coastline in some areas is in trouble because of inappropriate development. Lady talked about looking across the bay and seeing land being cleared. We have no requirement here for vegetative management plans with our development. We cannot get, I think we finally got a community to agree to do advanced street network plan that's combined with an integrated linear park system to let people know here's where the development is going to go and where your roads are going to go. And as a result, we have so many cul-de-sacs and so many communities here that is cutting off connectivity and adding to infrastructure costs. And it just goes on and on. Because people in small communities have so limited resources, planning falls down because they got to think about water. And water is a big issue in the province, and why there's not more support for it. That's a really good question that I wish I could answer.
Tom?
So just to defend myself in the fashionable part of it, I'm not saying it wasn't important. I'm just saying in terms of ebbs and flows. That's all. So it's still really, really important. It's just, once again, and this is coming from the Economist, it's coming from the Guardian, it's coming from there was those incredible debates that were in kind of post-World War II in terms of what did we want these communities to become, and if we look at the growth of suburbs, etc. And in some places like Ontario and in Toronto, etc., those urban debates have spawned a whole huge generation of incredibly interesting planners, etc. In rural areas, we haven't maybe had that debate in a long time, and now we're getting to the point, mostly because of demographics, that we're getting to that debate as well. So I think the fashion is going to, once again, it's not that it's not been important. It's just it's not been something that's been in the public conscience maybe as much. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. The attraction, just one thing on the attraction. I mean, I guess one of the reasons you don't see those in municipal plans, and this is speaking to municipal leaders, I would say is that our remit? Is that our importance? Is that what we're here to do? If you talk to Sheila, she's probably getting so many calls, or the gentleman over here, they're getting so many calls about fix this or fix that, etc. And that ability to plan out to say, how do we get more people into the community is a really difficult question. And so, and a lot of times you would say, well, maybe that's something the province takes care of. And a lot of times, maybe it shouldn't be the province that takes care of it. It should be say, how do we build a better business case? Sorry, I was talking business. Sorry, that's my role. But how do we build a better case for coming into this community and with all the things that we have, and communicating that out to people as well?
I think the history of municipal planning in this province is that the provincial government hired a lot of planners back in the 80s or so, and then laid them all off in the mid-1990s and kind of downloaded to the municipalities the responsibility for planning without giving them the resources. And it's only lately with the gas tax situation that communities now have some money for planning, but not every community, I guess, recognizes the importance of it. I want to address your point about talent attraction, because I think that's really important. Take the town of Trinity, which was a sleepy little community, beautiful little community, and then an artistic director went there and said, wow, this would be a great backdrop for a pageant where people go around the community. And next thing you know, you've got a multi-million-dollar operation because a talented person, an artistic director, went there and rediscovered a new use for the community. So yes, we're only limited by our imagination. Sir, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Probably more or less a statement. And I think it was Mr. Mullowney said about the land. Who owns all the land is very hard to go into a community and know who owns the land. Well, I was involved with municipal government for 20 plus years. And I know if you go into the community of St. Mary's, where I'm from, all you got to do is go to the town office and it's all there on a map, it's all marked out, and people are paying property tax on. And that's within the boundaries of the community, so there's no trouble to identify private land and crown land in our community. I don't know if it was the same for yours or any other community.
Is that a common practice, Harold, to do that?
I think that's kind of unique. There's still a lot of towns out there. I even hear that municipal conventions keeps coming up around the island where you're not required to register your land in this province. So that being said, a lot of people don't. So yes, you do know a lot of the property, but it's picked up piecemeal.
Oh yes, I get your point now.
Yeah.
We know who have claim to the land. They may not own but it's passed down from generation to generation. But at least we know who has claim on it, and it may not be registered in wherever in the registry of deeds or whatever.
Yes.
And I asked the solicitor, does that have something to do with spiritual use architects? Because we don't have that, so that's why we have to have an.
Well, the thing is, our community back in the late 80s and 90s was growing. The population was creeping up, they're creeping up. And we started to, we had a water system that was breaking down, so we had to try to replace it. And we were using free money through Canada Works and those programs that were on the go at the time. But there was aspects of that project that needed extra funding, and we had to go to municipal affairs, and they told us, you will not get no capital grants unless you agree to bring in property tax when the assessments are done. And we put a minute in council to bring in the property tax whenever the assessments were done, and that took, I think, a period of 2 years to do it. And we found it very, very beneficial for the community, and it still exists today. And it's a good source of revenue as well. Now, we also had people, once when their empty garden was taxed, and they had to pay probably $100 a year for it, they walked into the council and said, you take it, I don't want it anymore. So the council has land to sell to people if they so desire. But one problem I have with taxes and our property values went up substantially, or was this, yeah, because of the assessments were high back 3 or 4 years ago. And I called to the assessment agents to complain about their assessment. I figured they were too high. And why they were high, they based them on land sale community, which did not have property tax, and I think that is very, very unfair. And even though we had one piece of property that was bought by a person in Ontario for $40,000, and it wasn't worth 40,000 cents. Thank you.
Excellent point. So Sheila first and then Pat.
Okay, I'm first. I'm still getting back to this mapping notion. Now, I was talking to a girl who's working with government, and she just recently moved to Newfoundland, and that's what her training was. And she suggested to me that it's possible to maybe be able to get students who are being trained outside of the province to be able to come for a work term, so to speak, and get some remuneration, but be able to get the mapping done that I would suspect probably would be a fraction of the cost otherwise. Like, why can't we have some kind of training in the province, some kind of a school set up that at least we can have some people that have the qualifications to do mapping?
Sheila, it's so funny you say that, because Neil and I had the very same discussion on the bus coming down here, that we might need a school for architecture and planning, for example, where we could produce students who could do that kind of work. Yeah.
My last comment, because I don't want to monopolize this evening, but another thing that we're experiencing that's really frustrating, and I'm just wondering, have you had the same experience? We're finding that there's I don't know what's wrong with the Crown Land Division, but we're just loaded with frustration over the slow movement of things we want to try to get to a successful conclusion with Crown Lands. And it's not just myself saying that. I've gone around different circles, and I'm not going to name names or anything because it may be at their expense, but there seems to be a very serious issue right now in the Crown Lands Division. Can you comment in any way on that?
I can only comment to say that we deal with Crown Lands a lot, as we deal with Department of Municipal Affairs a lot, and it takes a long time. But if you go in fairness to those folks, there's they got a stack of files on their desk, and they're trying to get through it
middle, you have a really big major development, and you have to look about 8 and 9 and still not be kept. To me, I don't think I can take it as the argument you gave. I think it should be some kind of a ranking system.
Again, ma'am, I don't disagree with you. I think it should be faster too, but you know, you have to take that up with your MHA.
Oh, I have. And guess what? He totally agrees with me.
Ah, good.
Harold?
Sorry, guys.
No, I agree. It's a slow process. It takes a long while to get anything through Crown land. But as Neil said, they have big stacks in there. But also, again, it goes back to the fact that they don't always know what is and is not Crown land. I mean, we've had situations where someone will be convinced they're going after a piece of Crown land, and they might spend ages working on it. And then at the last moment, someone will come out of the woodwork with an old, Crown grant that goes back 100 years, and that trumps everything. And so Crown lands didn't even have knowledge of some of these things on occasion. So again, without records, you're just shooting in the dark on all this stuff.
I think we got time for one more question. Pat?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just want to go back maybe to the panel one more time around. I mean, assuming that municipalities in the room can identify the resources required to complete the plan, it ultimately will go back to the capacity to manage the plan. So just looking at the three up there, I think you bring three to this capacity issue. So from Harold, I'd be interested in hearing, Town of Babels has certain resources. I'm a bit familiar with the resources that are available around Witless Bay, but even then, if you follow at least the Irish Loop Post, you certainly have challenges from time to time in interpreting the plan and so on. So I'd like some perspective on how much resources you think you're putting into maintaining the plan. Neil, I'd be interested in saying, can you point out a province for, let's say, a comparable size municipality, some of what we're talking about here tonight, with similar resources, who are doing a reasonable job of managing the plan with the resources that they've got? And Tom, from your perspective, given that you're from you approach this from a risk perspective, what are the risks having a municipal plan adopted that you don't adhere to? And what are the consequences to the municipality? You could be the fiduciary or legal or whatever the case might be, if you actually have a plan that you can't effectively manage and abide by. So I just put that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'd like to comment on the second question a little bit too. First, perhaps, the fact that you cannot adequately manage the town plan eventually will open you up to a tremendous amount of litigation, to say the least, because you're going to get yourself afoul of not following your own regulations. And from time to time, residents and businesses will take you to task on that, and you'll find yourself in court for not having followed your own rules and regulations. How do you do that properly when you live in a town that can't always come up with the resources to manage it? I think, Pat, we could drop back in history a little bit. When you were involved around the municipal table as mayor, we talked a little bit about those kind of issues back then, and we said, again, the regional approach. At one point, we were looking at chipping in to perhaps hire collectively between them an individual who could be responsible for some of this governance and adherence to the rules.
We're still interested.
And so am I. But in the early days when we looked at that, we actually had an offer on the table that if we could find 3 towns that would throw some money down to make this happen, to hire an individual, the government might even throw in some money. But that's off the table since the government has backed away from it. But I think there still is an appetite, a need that the towns would come together and hire an individual for the region, because none of us in small towns have the kind of demands that would require a full-time individual to do this. But some of the issues that get picked up on, very minor issues, would save us a tremendous amount of money. And if I could just give you a very quick example. There are times we'll put out a permit to build a house and shed and whatnot, and someone will take it and walk away. And we often don't know until the house is built and the shed is up that it's done, because we're all volunteers. You got to send someone out to look at it maybe. There are times when you go out and look afterwards, you see the shed's in the wrong spots. The guy decided after he took the permit, yeah, I think I'll move it, build over here. Sometimes that's no problem, But it is a problem if you put it over a water line or under a power line or over a septic field, then it's a problem. There's times to go too close to a neighbor, the setbacks are not right. Or there's times they're supposed to put in a culvert for the driveway, and there's no culvert. And they'll make the argument, well, there was no culvert before, there's no water in the area, I don't need a culvert. But they have not anticipated the fact that over the winter you're pushing snow all down that street, and the spring runoff, the water's going somewhere. So then they'll probably end up in their basement flooded, and then they're coming back blaming the town because the town didn't make them put in the culverts. But we told them to put it in, they just didn't do it, and we didn't check on it because we didn't have anyone basically to do that. But I think regionally we could go down that road. So Pat, I don't know if I've answered your question, but.
Yeah, Tom? Oh, you're Neil, okay.
A small town that's doing a good job is a good one, Pat. We do have a couple of small towns that have a council that have a number of volunteers on it that are very active in the community, and some will actually go out and see if the developer has adhered to the requirements. We also have a lot of towns that we work with that will call us up and ask us to interpret something on their behalf. And so they don't have a planner, but they're asking us to give an opinion on something that's proposed based on the current plan that's in place. I think the best model is one where there's an opportunity for shared resources, and there's the opportunity for communities to do that. I don't think we're seeing enough of it yet. For some reason, there seems to be, we're doing a plan with a very small community right now, and there's another community that they're separated by a sign, but we couldn't get the other community to agree to work together and split the cost, and because they wanted their own plan, and that's sometimes the hard part. We're seeing that breaking down a lot, but there's still a little bit too much of it out there. So I'd like to be able to give you a long list, but I wouldn't have it.
And Tom, you'll have the last word here tonight.
Wow. On the risk side, Pat, I would say, obviously most of these are strategic risks, but there's a legal regulatory risk, as we've mentioned before, in terms of you're going to end up in litigation, especially if it says that a developer can come in and do this, and then you say no, they can't. They sometimes have much deeper pockets than towns and communities, and they'll take you to court. The operational, like how do you even function as a community if you've developed this big plan and it's just sitting there and it's gathering dust, nobody actually adheres to it or thinks about it or realizes, etc. So that it lends itself to ineffective operations, and you're not meeting your strategic goals. And then finally, it's just a reputational standpoint. If you're going to go through the whole process of doing it, developing a plan, bringing somebody in and paying, whether it's right or wrong, or paying someone a lot of money to get that done, there's a reputational risk to for the community, for the councillors, for the mayors, for the staff, etc., in terms of developing something that just becomes a piece of paper rather than something that you can use and make your community better as a result.